10 diet secrets from the 1960s that kept everyone skinny. Back in the 1960s, staying slim wasn't about calorie counting or trendy diets. It just happened naturally. Smaller portions, home-cooked meals, and family dinners were the norm, not the exception. Curious how they did it? In this video, we'll uncover 10 surprising and nearly forgotten secrets from the 60s that helped keep people effortlessly fit. Some of them might just surprise you. Let's start this journey back in time. Never snacking between meals. Sounds unbelievable, right? In an age where snack stands pop up everywhere, where protein bars, chip bags, or cookie boxes are always within reach in the office, in the car, or even in our handbags, it's hard to imagine a time when snacking between main meals almost didn't exist. But that was the reality of the 60s. Going back to that era, the family kitchen seemed to close up between fixed meal times. Rooting around the pantry between breakfast and lunch or between lunch and dinner was not encouraged. I remember vividly the words of mothers back then. "You'll spoil your dinner." And they meant it. It wasn't strictness. It was a simple rule of family life. You see, the reasons are simple. Firstly, snack food as we know it today was not yet common. There wasn't a whole aisle in the supermarket dedicated just to snacks of all colors and flavors. Even the corner grocery store only had a few simple cookies or candies. Secondly, and just as importantly, main meals back then were often very hearty and nutritionally complete. They were cooked from fresh, real ingredients, containing enough protein, fiber, and healthy fats. This helped people feel full for hours, a real feeling of fullness, not the fake fullness from processed foods. By not eating constantly throughout the day, the body had precious time to fully digest the previous meal. Blood insulin levels also remained stable, not spiking and dropping suddenly as they do when we constantly load up on sugar and carbs from snacks. When insulin levels are stable, the body can more easily access and burn stored energy, excess fat. And there's a psychological benefit too. When arriving at the table genuinely hungry, people tended to eat slower, focusing more on the meal. They savored the flavors of the food more completely, something we now call mindful eating. Eating slowly not only helps with digestion, but also gives the brain time to recognize satiety signals, thus naturally maintaining weight without needing to consciously count calories or restrict. Just one simple habit, no snacking between meals, but it created a natural break for the digestive system and metabolism, something that in today's busy, food-filled world, we easily overlook. Portion sizes were much, much smaller. The next thing might surprise many of you the most, especially when compared to the supersize culture of modern restaurants. In the 60s, portion sizes were much smaller than they are now. Try to imagine, a burger you bought at a diner was only the size of your palm, not the kind as big as a small flying saucer or our normal dinner plate today. How about a large soda? It was only a mere 8 ounces. Even dinner plates at home were only about 9 inches, while our common plates today are 12 inches or even more. This created a fascinating visual effect. Even a modest portion looked generous and satisfying on the smaller plate. People also tended to share snacks like popcorn at the movies or a scoop of ice cream for dessert, instead of everyone having a giant serving like now. The culture of supersizing, significantly increasing portion sizes, hadn't been born yet. What was the result? People naturally ate less without having to think about it, without struggling with themselves. It wasn't about strong willpower or painful restriction. It was simply the norm. That was all that was available. Modern research has clearly proven the so-called portion size effect. We tend to eat significantly more when served a larger portion, regardless of our actual hunger level. The more there is on the plate, the more we eat. People in the 60s were naturally protected from overeating simply because they were not offered or encouraged to eat huge portions. They ate until they felt satisfied, not until they felt stuffed. because that's all that was necessary and available. A simple yet incredibly effective secret. Sometimes the simplest solution is the one we most easily overlook. Just using smaller plates, you'll see a difference. People walked everywhere. Today, we plan our workouts. We drive to the gym, wear professional workout gear, and track every step, every calorie burned with high-tech wearables. But back in the 60s, walking wasn't called exercise. It was simply part of life. That's right. No one wore step trackers. They just moved because life required it. Kids walked or biked to school every day, regardless of the weather. Adults walked to the grocery store to pick up a few items needed for dinner, walked over to a neighbor's house to chat, or walked to the bus stop. But it wasn't just walking. Even daily household chores were significant physical activities. No automatic dishwashers. Women burned calories just by washing dishes 3 times a day. No convenient clothes dryers. You had to hand wash, wring out, and carry heavy clothes to hang outside. No remote controls for the TV. You had to get up to change the channel. No automatic garage doors. Men mowed the lawn with manual push mowers that required effort. They fixed things around the house with basic tools that demanded physical movement. Shopping also required more walking to move between stores or carry purchases. All these activities weren't strenuous, not high-intensity workouts. It was gentle, continuous movement throughout the day. This is what modern fitness experts call NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, heat generation from activities other than planned exercise. They consider it an ideal factor for maintaining weight and metabolic health. Living in the 60s meant you naturally moved more without thinking about it. Staying in shape didn't require special workouts. It came naturally through daily tasks that kept the body moving. In today's sedentary world, adding a little more movement to our daily schedule, even just walking a bit further or doing a few chores ourselves, can make an incredible difference. Do you remember any of these habits? Let me know in the comments below. Family dinner was sacred. In the 60s, dinner wasn't just a meal, it was a daily ritual, a fixed event. Like clockwork, around 6 p.m., the whole family would gather around the table. This was family time. No TV on, no phones for distraction. They simply didn't exist. Just real conversations and home-cooked food. The table was set carefully, maybe even with a nice tablecloth. Everyone sat in their assigned seats, used their plates and utensils properly. The meal happened slowly and meaningfully, not rushed to get to the next thing. This naturally encouraged mindful eating. You paid attention to the food, paid attention to the people around you. You weren't rushing to gobble down dinner while glued to a phone or TV screen. Instead, you talked with your parents, siblings, listened to their day's stories. You ate at a comfortable pace, allowing the body enough time to process the food and, most importantly, to recognize signals of fullness. Portions were served reasonably on the plate. Often, only 1 or 2 servings were placed on the table, and if someone wanted more, they would ask for seconds, rather than filling their plate from the start. This habit helped regulate hunger and taught people to appreciate their food. It fostered a healthy relationship with food, without the stress of counting calories or worrying about a harsh diet. In a world where eating times are often fragmented by work or entertainment, dedicating a specific undisturbed time for family dinner is truly a valuable secret for health and connection. Everything was cooked from scratch. Today, we have countless convenient options. Pre-packaged meals just need microwaving, all sorts of ready-made sauces, pre-mixed cake batters. Cooking from scratch is sometimes seen as a trend, an eat-clean choice. But in the 60s, it wasn't a trend. It was simply the only way to feed your family. No pre-packaged microwave dinners. No canned spaghetti sauce or ready-made soups. Homemakers and sometimes fathers spent hours each day preparing meals from real, original ingredients. Fresh vegetables bought at the market or from the garden. Flour, eggs, real butter, milk in glass bottles. Even salad dressing was homemade from oil, vinegar, and spices. Because food took a lot of effort to make, people valued it more and didn't waste it. Why was this so effective for staying in shape? Firstly, when you cook yourself, you have complete control over what goes into the dish. No unexpected additives, no hidden sugar in the sauce, no massive amounts of salt. Just homemade, authentic food. Secondly, making a fancy cake or dessert took a lot of time and effort, so it wasn't something you made and ate every week, but usually only for special occasions. This automatically limited the frequency of consuming sweets and calorie-rich, but nutrient-poor foods. Cooking from scratch meant you ate less processed food. Homemade portions tended to be smaller because you controlled the amount made. And most importantly, these meals truly filled you up. When food tasted real, came from real ingredients, and the body received necessary nutrients, you needed to eat less to feel satisfied, and you naturally ate less. It might have been slower, required more time, but that care and effort helped keep waistlines slim naturally. Perhaps in our too-fast life today, we should spend a little more time reconnecting with the source of our food. Cooking isn't just about filling the stomach, it's also about taking care of ourselves and our families. Sugar was an occasional treat. If you stepped into a 60s household, you'd see sugar and sweets held a very different place compared to our world today. It wasn't a default ingredient in every dish, every drink. Sugar was special. It was strictly controlled. It was only for special occasions. Kids back then didn't have unlimited access to candy, cookies, or soda, and dessert wasn't a nightly event after dinner. A slice of birthday cake or a small scoop of ice cream felt truly exciting and anticipated, precisely because it didn't happen often. Even foods we consider sweet today, like breakfast cereal, were much less sugary in the 60s, and the sweeter options were considered a rare indulgence. Soda only came in tiny 6.5-ounce bottles, and sugar came from very obvious sources: a small spoon of sugar in coffee, a homemade cookie, a slice of cake. It wasn't subtly hidden in bottled salad dressing, in industrial bread, or in thousands of processed foods like today. Keeping sugar as a rarity meant people enjoyed it more, and paradoxically, they craved it less. When you're not constantly stimulating your taste buds with sugar, your taste buds remain sensitive to natural sweetness. Foods that we find bland today, like an apple or a simple bowl of cereal, tasted perfectly sweet and satisfying to the less sugar-accustomed palate of the 60s. The absence of hidden sugar in processed foods made a huge difference for health and weight. Total sugar consumption was naturally very low. This had a profound impact. Blood sugar levels were stable, not spiking and crashing, leading to cravings or energy fluctuations. When the body didn't have to constantly struggle with excess sugar, it burned fat much more efficiently. Perhaps it's time we reconsider the place of sugar in our daily lives. Making it a special treat instead of a default, you'll see a difference not just in your physique, but also in how you feel about sweets. Are there any secrets from your parents' or grandparents' time that I missed? Please share them with us. Eating on a fixed schedule. In the 60s, looking at the clock had a very different meaning when it came to meals. Breakfast at 7 a.m., lunch at noon, and dinner around 6 p.m. It was like clockwork. These weren't suggestions or flexible times. It was a fixed schedule. The day started with breakfast, and most people ate it. There was no skipping breakfast because you were in a hurry. Lunch happened at noon, no matter where you were, at work, at school, or at home. The whole world seemed to stop for lunch, and everyone participated in this ritual. And here's the most important key point. Between these meals, there was almost nothing. The family kitchen was closed. Offices didn't have snack rooms or vending machines full of candy and treats. You ate at mealtime, period. This fixed eating schedule did something amazing for the body's metabolism. Your body knew when food would arrive and was ready to process it. Insulin sensitivity was maintained at a high level, which is crucial for blood sugar control and weight management. It also eliminated what's called decision fatigue about what or when to eat. You didn't have to think about whether you were hungry or if you should snack. The meal was an event with a clear beginning and end. This created natural fasting periods between meals, a concept we now know is incredibly important for metabolic health, also known as intermittent fasting. When you knew for sure that dinner would be at 6 o'clock, you weren't likely to mindlessly snack at 5:30 p.m. anymore. Your body developed a circadian rhythm related to eating, which helped optimize digestion, absorption, and energy burning. Structure sometimes brings freedom. Freedom from sudden cravings, freedom from the confusion of when to eat. A simple, surprisingly effective schedule. Fresh food was the only option. If you had a time machine and stepped into a grocery store in the 60s, you'd be surprised. Surprised by what wasn't there, as well as what was. You wouldn't find massive frozen food aisles filled with ready-made meals, frozen pizzas, or all sorts of ice cream. You also wouldn't see long rows of convenient packaged foods. Instead, you'd find real food, the kind that spoils if you don't use it quickly. The produce section was entirely seasonal and local. You'd buy strawberries in June when they were ripe, and apples in the fall. You couldn't buy asparagus in December just because you craved it. This wasn't scarcity. It was normal and natural. Food was harvested when fully ripe and traveled a short distance to the consumer. Tomatoes tasted like real tomatoes, sweet and juicy. You had to shop a few times a week because fresh food didn't last as long as processed or frozen goods. The butcher shop was where you bought meat, not prepackaged in industrial plastic wrap. You talked to the butcher, who might know your name, and he'd cut the piece of meat just as you requested. Produce sometimes still had dirt on it. Milk came in glass bottles delivered to your door by the milkman. Butter was real butter, not processed vegetable spreads with dozens of strange ingredients. The key is that this fresh food was naturally much more filling and nutritious. A real potato, cooked with its fibrous skin, will keep you full much longer than packaged instant mashed potatoes. Fresh vegetables had more vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants than frozen or canned veggies. Bread made from whole grains had a heaviness and density. You couldn't eat 6 slices without realizing you were full. Less processing also meant fewer additives were added, things often designed to make you eat more, like MSG to enhance flavor, hidden sugar, unhealthy fats. Food tasted like itself, its natural deliciousness. And when your body was fully supplied with necessary nutrients from real food, it felt satisfied faster, and you naturally ate less. Reconnecting with fresh, original, seasonal food is perhaps one of the simplest ways to improve our health and weight today. Manual labor was normal. Just like walking in the 60s, burning calories wasn't something you had to plan to do at the gym. It was simply called daily life. Men came home at the end of the day often tired from jobs that required real physical exertion. Lifting, building, farming, or manual labor in factories. Women spent the day in constant motion keeping the house tidy and clean. Kids? After school, they played outdoors until their mothers called them in for dinner, often when it was already getting dark. People burned calories simply by living their daily lives without thinking about exercise as a separate category that needed to be set aside for a specific time. Their lives were naturally filled with movement. Think of housework as a disguised full-body workout. Monday was traditionally laundry day, sorting clothes, washing with a semi-automatic machine or even by hand, wringing them out, carrying heavy laundry baskets upstairs or outside, and hanging clothes on a line. No quick steam irons. Ironing could take hours. Cleaning the house meant kneeling to wash floors by hand or with a traditional mop, reaching high corners to dust, and pushing a heavy vacuum cleaner around. It's estimated that a typical 60s homemaker could burn over 1,000 more calories per day than her modern counterpart, just by performing daily household tasks. It's like running a long distance, but it was distributed throughout the day in natural activities. Children's lives were also very different. After school was time spent in the outside world. Bikes were the main way to get to friends' houses or explore the neighborhood. Games like hide and seek, tag, jumping rope, playing baseball, all required running, climbing, constant movement. In short, movement wasn't something stressful, boring, or forced. It was woven into life, into work, into fun, into daily commuting. This kept the metabolism constantly active, helping maintain physique naturally. Perhaps the lesson here isn't to go back to hand-washing clothes, but to find ways to integrate more natural movement into our modern lives. Do you have any memorable stories about family dinners without TV? Or about foods, desserts, that only appeared on special occasions, making you eagerly anticipate them? Feel free to share. Rarely eating out. And here, dear friends, is perhaps the most powerful secret among the 10 from the 60s that we are exploring. In the 60s, eating out at restaurants was a very special occasion, not a daily or weekly affair. The average family at that time might eat out once a month, or even less. What does this mean? It means they had almost complete control over what went into their bodies every day. Look at this number. In 1960, Americans spent only about 25% of their food budget on eating out. Today, that number has soared to nearly 50%. But even this number doesn't tell the whole story, because the concept of eating out back then was also very different. Eating out in the 60s often meant sitting down at a decent restaurant for a special occasion, an anniversary, a birthday, or an important date. It didn't mean buying fast food for lunch every day or ordering takeout 3 nights a week because you were too busy. Fast food did exist, but it occupied a very small part of the overall culinary landscape. Eating at McDonald's, which only had 228 locations across the U.S. in 1960, was often considered a special treat for the kids, not a meal solution for busy adult nights. Lunch at work? Usually a lunchbox brought from home. The idea of buying lunch every day was foreign and impractical for most people back then. People ate what they had prepared and brought from home. Because families controlled what was in their homemade food, they naturally avoided large amounts of hidden sugar, unhealthy fats, excess salt, and especially the oversized portions so common in restaurant food today. This level of control is almost impossible to achieve when we eat out frequently. Restaurant food always tends to be richer, more flavorful, saltier, and higher in calories than home-cooked food. That's what makes it special and appealing. But when you only enjoy it once a month, your body can handle it easily. When you eat it several times a week, those extra calories, huge amounts of sodium, and unhealthy fats will accumulate. The difference between enjoying a special occasion and consuming regularly is the difference between enjoyable moments with little impact and a burden on health and physique. This is perhaps the hardest lesson to apply in today's world full of convenient eating out options, but it is also one of the most important factors explaining why the previous generation stayed in shape so naturally. Connecting past and present. First, it's important to remember that the concept of physical beauty also changed significantly over the decades. In the 60s, the preferred standard was often a thin, willowy figure, reminiscent of famous supermodels of the era like Twiggy or Jean Shrimpton. This societal pressure for slimness, to some extent, also contributed to a weight maintenance or even weight loss trend at that time. And this leads to the second point. While the majority of people maintained their physique through simple, healthy lifestyle habits we just discussed, the 60s also saw the emergence and popularity of horrific, extreme, and even dangerous weight loss methods. We had classic diets like the cabbage soup diet, promising rapid weight loss but incredibly monotonous, nutrient deficient, and unsustainable. Or scary stories about complete starvation under medical supervision in hospitals, as recounted in the film A Matter of Fat about Gilles Leran. And we can't forget the use of weight loss pills containing amphetamine, a highly dangerous stimulant, prescribed quite indiscriminately back then, leading to countless serious health problems. Among models, or those under heavy body pressure, there were even more extreme methods to maintain the super thin figure required by the fashion industry, such as the rumored practice of eating cotton balls to fill the stomach or forms of bowel cleansing. While healthy habits helped many people maintain weight, the pressure regarding physique and the search for quick weight loss miracles emerged early and sometimes led to sad consequences, completely different from the sustainable lifestyles we just explored. Finally, it's interesting to note that looking back, we can see many eating principles and lifestyle habits of the 60s have surprisingly similar aspects to popular dieting or healthy lifestyle trends today, just with different names. Eating on a fixed schedule with long breaks between main meals is very similar to the principles of intermittent fasting. Cooking from scratch with fresh, simple ingredients, avoiding processed foods, is the core of the Eat Clean movement. And limiting sugar consumption, focusing on whole foods, is somewhat comparable to low-carb or even keto diets. However, there is a core difference. People in the 60s did all of that naturally. They didn't do it because they were dieting. They did it because it was the way of life, the culture, the available conditions. These habits were woven into the daily rhythm, not a temporary program or a goal requiring extraordinary effort to achieve. Understanding these points helps us get a fuller picture of the 60s physique secret. It was a combination of naturally healthy lifestyle with societal pressures and extreme methods that coexisted. No magic, no miracle pill, no harsh workouts, as we understand them today. Just simple, practical choices, repeated every day, woven into the structure of life. These habits helped keep waistlines trim and bodies healthy naturally. These stories remind us that sometimes the answer to the most complex challenges of modern life, like maintaining weight or living healthy, lies in going back to the basics, the fundamental principles that existed long before everything became so noisy and complicated. Forgotten poor man, meals your grandparents ate to survive. What if I told you some of the most soul-warming meals came from times of pure desperation? This isn't just food. This is survival, memory, and the magic of making do. Let's rewind time and reminisce about 20 forgotten poor man meals grandparents ate to survive. Bread and drippings. There was a time when even the smallest scrap had purpose, when what lingered at the bottom of a skillet held the power to feed a family. In kitchens that smelled of wood smoke and struggle, bread and drippings wasn't a last resort. It was a quiet triumph. Long before nutrition labels and diet trends, survival was measured in spoonfuls of fat saved from bacon, sausage, or the rare roast, poured carefully into jars and tucked away like treasure. Back then, stale bread wasn't tossed. It was revived with the golden gloss of pan drippings, maybe sprinkled with salt if luck allowed. On cold nights, that humble slice brought more than warmth. It brought a sense of dignity, a whisper that said, "You'll make it through." This meal didn't begin in the Great Depression. Its roots stretched back through generations of working-class families across Europe and the American South. What united them all was the understanding that food wasn't just about taste. It was about survival, resourcefulness, and love. In a world where nothing could be wasted, even grease was sacred. Bread and drippings might seem simple today, but to those who lived it, it was a small miracle on a worn plate. Potato and hot water soup. During the darkest days of the Great Depression, when grocery shelves felt like a luxury and meat was a rare sight, families turned to what they had: a few wrinkled potatoes and a pot of boiling water. That was enough. And somehow, from that humble base, something close to comfort emerged. Across rural towns and inner cities alike, this potato broth found its place at dinner tables not out of tradition, but out of pure necessity. To stretch the flavor, Onion skins might be tossed in, or maybe a bay leaf borrowed from a neighbor's spice tin. If milk was on hand, a splash transformed it into something softer. Some added flour to give it body. Others tossed in potato peels for nutrients that couldn't be spared. The magic of this dish lay not in richness, but in resilience. Potatoes, with their long shelf life and modest cost, were the quiet heroes of the era. What this soup lacked in extravagance, it made up for in warmth. And in a time when hunger loomed, that warmth was everything. Coffee soup, Depression-era breakfast. There's something strangely tender about the smell of old coffee and stale bread. It speaks of mornings shaped by struggle, not luxury. In the past, when breakfast had to come from whatever was left in the cupboard, families leaned on a modest invention: coffee soup. This wasn't the rich, frothy kind you'd find in cafes today. It was brewed weak, on purpose, and reused until the grounds had nothing left to give. The leftover liquid, barely strong enough to tint the water brown, was poured over hardened slices of bread or crushed crackers, softening them just enough to chew. If sugar was on hand, it might be sprinkled in to take the edge off the bitterness. A dab of butter was a rare but welcome luxury. While simple, this meal wasn't without roots. Versions of it had existed for centuries across Europe. French and Nordic immigrants brought the idea with them, calling it café soup or café soupa. But in America, it found new meaning, not as tradition, but as necessity. When money disappeared, people found ways to hold on to dignity through even the humblest meals. Coffee soup wasn't about flavor. It was about filling a belly, stretching what little you had, and starting the day with something warm, no matter how thin. Cabbage and dough soup. Can you recall a time when the heart of a meal wasn't in the ingredients, but in the hands that made it stretch? Back when food was scarce and patience had to simmer longer than the broth, cabbage and dough soup quietly earned its place at countless dinner tables. It didn't pretend to impress. It simply did what needed to be done. Cabbage, sturdy and slow to spoil, was a gift in itself. Tossed into a pot with water, a pinch of salt, and if fortune allowed, a spoonful of leftover grease, it transformed into something more than the sum of its parts. But what gave the soup its soul were the dumplings, humble lumps of flour and water, shaped by hand, and dropped gently into the bubbling mix. As the dough softened and expanded, the pot began to look generous, even when the pantry was not. This meal wasn't just about nourishment. It was about making something from nearly nothing, and in doing so, creating warmth, dignity, and togetherness. Around that pot, families found more than food. They found a reason to sit close, to share, and to carry on. Cracker and milk soup. Do you remember a time when dinner was as simple as a bowl of crackers and milk, and somehow that was enough? Back when times were tough and every bite had to count, cracker and milk soup quietly made its way onto kitchen tables across the country. It didn't come from a simmering pot or a full pantry, but from whatever was left: a chipped bowl, a handful of saltines, and the last splash of milk in the bottle. Crackers were cheap, shelf-stable, and often handed out at soup kitchens or relief lines. Unlike bread, which spoiled quickly, they became a trusted staple for families trying to make ends meet. Some would pour cold milk over the broken pieces, creating a kind of humble cereal. Others warmed the milk, making the meal feel a bit more like soup. In especially lean times, a dab of bacon grease transformed it into something savory. A sprinkle of sugar, when available, brought a touch of sweetness. It wasn't fancy, and it rarely filled a belly completely, but it brought warmth, comfort, and the quiet dignity of getting by. For many children of that era, it remains a memory of love served with almost nothing, yet meaning everything. Did your grandparents ever cook any of these meals? Which one do you remember most? Please let us know in the comment. green tomato pie. There's something quietly poetic about turning what was nearly lost into something worth remembering. Green tomato pie was just that, a dessert born not from abundance, but from the will to waste nothing. It might have looked humble, but its story was rich. When apple prices soared or harvests ran short, folks didn't throw up their hands. They turned to what was left clinging to the vines, firm green tomatoes that hadn't had time to ripen. Too sour to eat raw, they were sliced thin and slowly simmered with sugar, cinnamon, and a dash of vinegar, until their sharpness mellowed into something surprisingly familiar. Baked into a flaky crust, this makeshift pie took on a life of its own. The filling softened, the flavors deepened, and more than a few people were fooled into thinking it was made with actual apples. That was the magic of it, not just in taste, but in intention. Popular among farming families, especially in the Midwest and South, green tomato pie was more than a dish. It was a testament. It reminded people that even in the face of frost or famine, creativity could still serve dessert, and that sometimes the sweetest things came from what others might overlook. If you still make any of these dishes at home, please comment yes and share your recipe so we can store them for future generations. Bologna and cornbread dumplings. When the cupboards ran low and options dwindled, families didn't panic. They improvised. One of the cleverest creations to come out of that era was bologna and cornbread dumplings. It may not sound like much today, but back then, it was a lifesaver on a plate. Cornmeal, especially across the rural South, was always on hand. It was cheap, versatile, and didn't spoil easily. Instead of relying on precious flour, home cooks mixed cornmeal with water or milk to make a soft dough. Then came the bologna, salty, rubbery, and undeniably affordable. It wasn't fancy meat, but it brought protein to the table when meat prices soared beyond reach. Small chunks of bologna were folded into the cornmeal mix and rolled into rough dumplings. These were dropped into simmering broth or boiling water, where they puffed up into tender, filling bites that could stretch a meager dinner just far enough. What made this dish memorable wasn't just its thriftiness, but its spirit. It was about adaptability. It was about turning what little you had into something you could gather the family around. In the hardest of times, meals like this reminded people that creativity could still feed a household, and sometimes even lift their spirits. Boiled flour dumplings. Some meals weren't born from cookbooks. They were born from survival, forged in quiet kitchens where hunger sat beside hope. One such dish? Boiled flour dumplings. Nothing fancy, just flour, water, and a pinch of salt. But, in a time when pantry shelves were nearly bare, that was more than enough to keep a family fed. My grandfather once told me about a winter when snow piled high against the doors and meat was a distant memory. My great-grandmother stirred a pot of cloudy water on the stove, dropping in lumps of dough made from what little flour was left in the sack. She added a touch of leftover bacon grease for flavor, and somehow it felt like a feast. This kind of cooking stretched across generations and continents. Eastern European immigrants brought their own dumpling traditions, which blended into Appalachian kitchens and working-class homes. While richer households floated dumplings in hearty stews, those with less served them in thin broths or just salted water. And yet, even without meat or vegetables, there was something deeply comforting in every bite. What these dumplings lacked in elegance, they made up for in purpose. They were warm, they were filling, and above all, they were a quiet reminder that resourcefulness could carry you through anything. Peanut butter soup. Some dishes came from desperation, others came from sheer ingenuity. Peanut butter soup, oddly comforting and undeniably practical, belonged to both. In homes where the fridge echoed empty and meat was a rare luxury, this unlikely dish offered just enough substance to get by. What made it so valuable wasn't just its flavor, it was its staying power. Peanut butter was affordable, high in protein, and could sit in a jar for months without spoiling. That made it one of the most dependable staples during the Depression. Instead of spreading it on bread, families stirred it into hot water or milk, whisking until it turned into a smooth, velvety broth. Depending on what was available, the soup could swing sweet or savory. A spoonful of sugar created something akin to a warm dessert, while chopped onions and a pinch of salt transformed it into a savory, stick-to-your-ribs meal. In truth, peanut soups had deep roots in African and Southeast Asian traditions, where peanuts were a cornerstone ingredient long before America adopted them. Though simple, peanut butter soup stood as a quiet reminder. Survival wasn't always about having more. Sometimes it was about reimagining what little you had into something nourishing enough to get through the day. If this video brought back memories, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more trips down memory lane. Corn Dodgers. Before store-bought bread became a household norm, and long before sliced loaves lined grocery shelves, there were corn dodgers, simple, rugged, and born from necessity. These humble little cakes weren't just food, they were survival tucked into a crispy crust. When flour grew scarce and wheat prices climbed beyond reach, rural families across the South and Midwest leaned into what they had plenty of: cornmeal. Corn was more than a crop, it was a lifeline. Ground down into meal, it didn't spoil easily and needed no refrigeration. Mixed with nothing more than water, a dash of salt, and a spoonful of fat if you were lucky, it turned into a batter that sizzled in hot pans or browned slowly on flat stones. The beauty of corn dodgers was their practicality. They traveled well, didn't go stale quickly, and could be eaten hot, cold, dipped in broth, or, on special days, slathered with gravy. Pioneers carried them west. Soldiers packed them in their kits. By the time the Great Depression hit, the Dodger was already an old friend at the table. More than just a filler, these cornmeal cakes reminded folks that with a little grit and creativity, even the leanest cupboards could still put something warm on the plate. Corn cob jelly. What kind of sweetness comes from something most folks would toss away without a second thought? Back in the days when nothing was wasted, even the stripped cobs from summer's corn found their way into the pot. Once the kernels had been eaten or stored, the bare cobs were gently boiled to coax out a pale, golden liquid that carried the subtle memory of the field. With a little sugar and a spoonful of pectin, that humble broth transformed into something unexpectedly elegant: corn cob jelly. Its delicate flavor, lightly sweet, faintly earthy, was unlike anything else. Spread on a biscuit, stirred into porridge, or layered over warm cornbread, it offered a taste of resourcefulness and quiet pride. In farming homes across the South and Midwest, where corn fed both people and livestock, this jelly was more than just a clever recipe. It was a reflection of a deeper mindset. It proved that with a little care and creativity, even the most overlooked scraps could bring comfort to a table and sweetness to a hard day. A jar of corn cob jelly wasn't just food, it was a memory preserved. Molasses milk. Ever notice how a single sip can carry you back in time? Back to a quiet morning at the kitchen table, when the hum of a radio filled the room and a glass of warm molasses milk waited beside a chipped plate. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough. When sugar was too dear to spare, molasses became the go-to comfort. Thick, earthy, and rich with iron and calcium, it lingered in old pantry jars longer than any sweetener had a right to. In Southern homes especially, it was gold in a bottle, used to stretch sweetness just a little further. Parents stirred it into milk for their children before school. Laborers sipped it before heading out into the fields. Some swore it steadied the nerves and strengthened the bones, and maybe it did, but what lingered most was the care behind it. The quiet message that even in lean times, love found a way. Molasses milk wasn't just a drink. It was a memory steeped in patience and sacrifice, a reminder that the smallest comforts, offered with open hands, could carry a family through the longest days. Tomato gravy over rice. If you ever wondered how Southern kitchens made magic from next to nothing, tomato gravy over rice was one of their quiet masterpieces. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly didn't come from a cookbook, but it had everything a struggling household of that time needed: warmth, comfort, and just enough substance to carry folks through a hard day's work. Rice was the backbone, cheap, shelf-stable, and easy to cook in big pots. When meat was scarce and vegetables ran thin, it became the perfect canvas for whatever could be stirred together. The gravy, usually just tomatoes, fresh or canned, thickened with a bit of flour and flavored with whatever fat had been saved in the skillet: bacon grease, lard, or sometimes even drippings from a roast long gone. Some households liked it silky smooth, others left it chunky, letting the pieces of tomato bring texture. And if there wasn't much to work with, even tomato juice and water could become a broth worth pouring. Though the dish had its roots in Southern traditions, often served over biscuits, it was rice that made it stretch farther during leaner years. More than just a frugal fix, it was a reminder that flavor didn't have to be expensive, and home didn't have to be fancy to feel full. Bologna cake. Not every celebration came with a roast or a fancy spread. Sometimes the centerpiece was a stack of lunch meat dressed up like a party dish. Enter the Bologna cake, a quirky, resourceful creation that turned budget groceries into something surprisingly presentable. In a time when wallets were light and expectations had to be managed, families leaned on ingenuity to bring some joy to the table. Bologna, already a household staple thanks to its affordability and long shelf life, became the foundation. Sliced into even rounds and layered carefully, each piece was frosted with whipped cream cheese or mayonnaise, sometimes spiced up with mustard or garlic powder for extra kick. The final touch? A decorative edge piped with more cream cheese, and if the kitchen had it, a dusting of paprika for flair. It wasn't gourmet, and it didn't need to be. What it represented mattered more: a desire to create something that looked special, even when the ingredients were anything but. During the Depression and beyond, this dish was a playful nod to celebration on a shoestring. It reminded everyone at the table that style didn't have to come with a price tag, and that love and effort could make even bologna feel like a treat. Grits and water. You could tell how hard the times were by what showed up in the cooking pot, and some days all that bubbled inside was cornmeal and water. No milk, no butter, no extras, just grits, plain and honest. In the American South, where corn was cheap and plentiful, this dish became a quiet companion through the toughest years. While grits were traditionally prepared with milk or seasoned stock, those ingredients quickly disappeared when the Depression hit hardest. Water had to do. Families stirred slowly, adding just a pinch of salt, if they had it, to keep the blandness at bay. Some made it thin like soup to stretch it further. Others let it simmer into a thick, hearty mash that stuck to your ribs. Interestingly, grits were once used by indigenous tribes long before they reached Southern kitchens. That tradition of using every part of the harvest stayed alive through necessity. Even cooled leftovers had value: sliced, fried in lard, and served crisp the next day. This wasn't gourmet cooking. It was grit in every sense of the word. A bowl of cornmeal and water may sound forgettable, but for those who lived through it, it was a symbol of perseverance, of making something out of nearly nothing, and surviving with dignity intact. Slump or grunt. There was a time when dessert didn't require an oven or a fancy recipe, just a pot, a handful of fruit, and a little imagination. That's how humble treats like slump or grunt became staples in kitchens that had more spirit than supplies. In New England cabins, prairie wagons, and Depression-era farmhouses, these steamed sweets offered a taste of comfort when baking wasn't an option. The method was beautifully simple. Whatever fruit was available, wild berries, chopped apples, rhubarb, or even canned peaches, was simmered slowly with sugar until soft and syrupy. Then, spoonfuls of biscuit-like dough were dropped on top and covered, letting the heat gently steam the dumplings until they puffed and soaked in the fragrant juices below. The result was rustic, warm, and deeply satisfying. The names might have changed by region. Some heard a gentle grunt as the pot bubbled. Others saw the dough slump as it cooled. But the feeling was always the same, a bit of sweetness after a long, hard day. It was never about elegance. It was about making something from very little, gathering around the stove, and sharing a dessert that filled the home with the smell of hope and homemade love. Apple peel jelly. Before store shelves overflowed with ready-made jams and brightly labeled jars, sweet spreads came from scraps and a bit of determination. Apple peel jelly was one of those forgotten kitchen treasures that transform scraps most folks would throw away into something worth spreading on a fresh slice of warm bread. Back in those days, when every apple was peeled for pies or canned for winter, the peels and cores were saved. Not because they were pretty, but because they still held value. Natural pectin, subtle flavor, and a trace of sweetness. Tossed into a pot with water, those scraps simmered until their essence seeped out. Then came a touch of sugar, maybe a drop of lemon, and time. The result? A translucent golden jelly that tasted like care and resourcefulness. If sugar was in short supply, folks used honey or molasses, whatever they had. It wasn't just about flavor. It was about making food last, making use of everything, and passing down know-how from one generation to the next. Apple peel jelly wasn't just a treat. It was a quiet triumph. A reminder that in a world with limits, there's still room for sweetness. All it took was a stovetop, a steady hand, and the refusal to waste a single thing. Wilted lettuce salad. Who knew a sad, floppy head of lettuce could end up stealing the show at dinner? Back in the days when fridges were rare and wasting food was unthinkable, even the limpest greens still had their moment to shine. In southern kitchens, especially in Appalachian homes, wilted lettuce salad wasn't a consolation prize. It was a small triumph of tradition and thrift. Once the lettuce began to droop, folks would bring it back to life with a sizzling dressing made from bacon grease, one of the most treasured scraps in any kitchen. Into the pan went a splash of vinegar, a spoonful of sugar, and a pinch of salt. The hot mixture was then poured over the softened leaves, wilting them just enough to draw out a smoky, tangy aroma that could stop you mid-step. On good days, maybe a few slivers of onion or crumbled boiled egg joined the mix. But even when the pantry was bare, the flavor ran deep and satisfying. This humble dish was more than a way to save lettuce. It was a quiet lesson in making do, in honoring every harvest, and in finding comfort where no one expected it. Bread pudding with water sauce. Can you still remember the smell of something sweet bubbling in the oven, made from nothing more than yesterday's bread and a little hope? In kitchens where waste was unthinkable and every crumb held potential, bread pudding with water sauce became more than just dessert. It became comfort. Instead of tossing stale bread, families soaked it in a mixture of milk, sometimes watered down, sugar, and maybe an egg if luck or the hen allowed. A touch of cinnamon, clove, or even nutmeg gave it a warmth that felt far richer than its ingredients. But the real ingenuity showed up in the sauce. With butter and cream out of reach, home cooks created a simple topping from water, sugar, and flour, whisked together until glossy and smooth. If there was a splash of vanilla tucked away in the pantry, it found its way in too. This wasn't just about feeding a sweet tooth, it was about lifting spirits. Bread pudding with water sauce stood as a quiet reminder that even the humblest ingredients, when handled with care and heart, could bring a family together around the table with something to smile about. If you enjoyed this nostalgic trip back in time, if these stories touched your heart and brought back beautiful memories, don't forget to hit like to support the channel, and more importantly, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell icon so you don't miss any of our upcoming nostalgic videos. We have many more interesting stories we want to share with you. You can also share this video with friends and family members who also grew up in the 60s. Let's reminisce together. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch and accompany me on this journey. See you in the next video.